Okay guys, so we just completed part 4. Now we're going to create a folder and we are going to call it part 5. And we're going to go in here and we're going to rename this CPP. We're going to rename it to part 5. We're going to delete this a.out. We're going to close that. Actually, we need to open part 5. All right, we're going to move this over here, zoom in a little bit for you. All right, then, so this time, P here. Okay, so now that we've got our environment set up again, what we're going to do is, so we want to allow our user to make choices, right? That really does matter. And while we're continuing on this modularity, so as you can see, this code here, that's a copy of this code here, right? So why do we need to call that function? Why do we need to repaste this code every time? We shouldn't have to. It definitely makes our code look unclean. So we're going to do a new function. We'll call it int. It's going to return an int. It's going to be called getNum, and it is going to receive nothing. It doesn't need anything from the main function. Then down here, we're going to do int. We should always do things in the order that they appear. We want to remember to do our function comment up here. And I just make these into blocks so that they're more noticeable. That way you can read them easier. You know where they are. So we'll say this function gets a single integer from the user. It also asks the user for the number. And that's it. That's it for there. Go ahead and close off this function comment here. And then we'll save that. And then down here below add. So we'll make sure to try and space these out a little bit so that they're, you can see that they're blocks. So we'll do int get num. It receives nothing from main, so we don't need to declare it there. And then in here, we're going to do this. Okay. Please enter the first number. So we're going to copy this code, and we don't need it anymore up there because we're going to put it down here in this function to make our code more readable. Okay. Please enter, and we'll change this so that it applies every time. Please enter a whole number. Okay, now we're going to come up here and we are going to delete this. And then here we are going to do cin number 1, and then we're going to return number 1 semicolon. And that's just going to send that int back up to here. So here, now this is right. So the goal of this application is to allow the user to make some choices. So we don't really need this stuff right now, because what we're going to allow them to do is to add and subtract numbers, to do add or subtract. So we're going to copy this add function and we're going to put it here, and we're going to change it just a little bit. We're going to call it sub. And we're going to change this to a minus sign. And then up here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to copy this. We're going to place it below here. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing as the add function, except for it's subtracting. So we're going to change this function, subtracts the first parameter from, and then we'll move this down. So now we have the sub function, the add function, and the getNum function. Add, sub, getNum. So now we're going to get into what's called an if statement. So let's change what this output is real quick. So we're going to say this app allows you to add or subtract two numbers. Now we're going to ask the user to do another thing. So we're going to say for add, enter 1. For subtract, enter 2. And you know what? Let's break those up with an end line. So that'll make the menu look nicer. So it says this app allows you to add or subtract two numbers. For add, enter 1. For subtract, enter 2. Then we need to get the number right. So we'll do we'll say int choice, and we're just going to say int choice. And then we're going to say cn choice. And that's going to get the choice from the input stream. This is the input stream, and then it's going to use the input operator to get the choice, like we've done before. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to use a new type of statement. And the statement is called if. And you can see that turns red there. And we say if choice, and this double equals it's called the is equals operator. It's different than the assignment operator, right? The equal symbol. It's different than the assignment operator because we're not setting choice equal to something. We're checking to see if choice is equal to something. And we can say if choice is equal to 1, then execute this block of code. Okay? And then we can use another magic word, which is called else. And then so we're saying otherwise, so if this, then do this, else, which means otherwise, if. So we're saying else, if this next statement is true, do this part. So we're saying else if choice is equal to 2. So we're saying if the choice is equal to 2. Okay, so if, else if, then we'll do this part. Now we do want to consider, what if our user entered the wrong number? Okay, so what if they entered 3? On accident, they entered 3. Well, that's something we don't know what to do with it, right? So then we have a magic word called else. This in some other languages is called the default. But basically this says, okay, if they didn't do this part, or they didn't do this part, well then what? Now we need to do something different. So we'll say else do this block of code. And it's very important to consider that something else might have happened. So we're going to say, okay, if they entered 1, then we'll do addition. If they entered 2, then we'll do subtraction. Otherwise, what should we do? And in my experience, what we should do is we should say cout the number you entered is invalid. Okay, and we'll end that with end line semicolon. Okay, so now how would we handle subtraction? Or how would we handle addition? Let's go for addition first. So we're gonna do it the same way that we would have done it before, right? Just like we added before. But in this case, we have this fancy getNum function. So we will say int num1 equals getNum, and then we'll say int num2 equals getNum, and then we'll say add num1 comma num2. So we're adding them, and then we're going to say before that we're going to say int num3 equals, and then we'll copy this line from down here because we're not going to need it anymore, right? And we will output that here. And we'll say it, and then we did rename these, so we probably should keep the naming scheme consistent. That's important. Number 1, number 2, number 3, add number 1 to number 2. And then we're going to output number 1. Okay. And then down here, we're going to return 0 again. Now, we need to do the exact same thing again. So we can copy all of this code. And we can do subtraction here. So we'll change this to a minus sign here. And we'll change this here to sub number 1, number 2. And then we have everything in place that we need to do. Now we're going to recompile. So G++ part5.cpp. All right, sudo a.out. All right, this app allows you to add or subtract two numbers. For add, enter 1. For subtract, enter 2. So now what we need to do is we need to, let's do add. Okay, 1. Please enter a whole number. 10. Okay, please enter a whole number. 12. 10 plus 12 equals 22. All right, so now we need to, we'll just run this again. This app allows you to add or subtract two numbers. Now let's do the subtraction. 2. All right, please enter a whole number. 10. Please enter another whole number. 12. And we can see that 10 minus 12 equals -2. So the app works in both cases where it can both add numbers and subtract numbers. Now we're doing quite well on our way to a terminal operated calculator tool. And that's pretty neat. In the next part, what we're going to do is allow the user to continually enter a value. So we don't have to recompile the program every time we want to add or subtract a number. And we'll do that using a concept called loops. Alrighty guys.